Hi guys, it's Jamie from Gilbrook Farm, and today I'm going to take you along as I make my gluten-free bread. I've been gluten-free for 13 years now, and over the course of 13 years, gluten-free bread has come a very, very long way. Back when I first was gluten-free, some of the different brands that I used to buy off the shelves tasted like cardboard. Absolutely terrible. And it's improved quite a bit, but also the price has gone significantly up. It just seems like there's a market for it, and definitely people are taking advantage of individuals like myself who have to have a gluten-free diet. So my quest has been to create my own gluten-free flour, my own gluten-free bread that I can make here at home and I can do relatively cheaply. Because the gluten-free breads that I was buying recently were anywhere between like $5 and $6 a loaf. And even if you were to buy like the gluten-free bread mixes, they're somewhere up there around $8 for a box to buy just one pre-mixed powder to add and make your own flour. Or if you were to buy like the bread mixes, they can run upwards of $12 for a 4-pound bag of flour. The bread that I make is under $1.50 a loaf, probably closer to $1, just because I buy everything in bulk and I make everything myself. So let me show you how I make that. This is a very rough recipe. If you're looking for one of those recipes where you're weighing out each individual ingredient, this isn't that. My whole method of cooking, my whole way of cooking is not pretty, it's functional, and it comes out tasting good. So if you're looking for something that you're going to put in a bakery window, this isn't that. This is something that you can whip up in under 2 hours and have a really good loaf of bread. Okay, so what do you need? Well, to get started, you need some gluten-free flour. Now, I make my own gluten-free flour blend. I'm going to link that up above if you guys are interested in that. The only thing that's in that is rice, tapioca starch, and oatmeal. In the original recipe, I also add xanthan gum. Since then, I only added the xanthan gum when I actually make the recipe. I don't actually put it in the flour mix, but that's, as always, optional. You're going to need about 1 3/4 cups of oatmeal, and I use gluten-free oatmeal for that. You're going to need some dry active yeast. Quick note on this, first of all, don't get the instant yeast, you need the dry active yeast. This was a 1-pound bag that I purchased for $4.70 from Azure. Now, if you were to go to Walmart or any of the other big box stores, grocery stores, they sell the little Fleshman jars for $4.70 for 4 ounces. If you guys are going to get into bread making, you're going to want to buy your yeast in bulk. It's so much cheaper. You're going to need some baking powder, a little bit of sugar or honey for feeding your yeast. You're going to need an egg. You're going to need some butter. And if you want, this is optional, you can add some lard. This is lard that I saved from my drippings. This adds a little bit extra flavor if you like it. My kids do not like this. I love it. I think it adds a little extra flavor to the bread. You're going to need some salt. Again, the xanthan gum is optional. You need some olive oil and a little splash of apple cider vinegar. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make your yeast. And I use about 1.5 tablespoons of, again, active dry yeast, not instant yeast. Not really measuring here. Now we need to feed the yeast, and so I use a little bit of sugar. You can use honey if you like. And now we need to put some warm water in there. I use my finger usually to just figure out how much or what temperature the water is warm enough at. But until you guys are used to that, use a thermometer. It needs to be around 110 degrees. If you get it too hot, you're going to kill your yeast. So let's take it over here and we're going to fill this bowl up about 3/4 of the way with some warm water. Alright, so it's about 110 degrees. I'll measure this out for you guys since I don't normally do this. About 1.25 cups. Okay, now we're just going to stir this a little bit. And we're just going to put this off to the side and let it rise. So everything we're going to make here is going to be done in a food processor. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to put your egg in there and we're going to blend it. Next, we're going to add 1 3/4 cups of gluten-free oats. And we're going to blend it. Now you're going to want to make sure you scrape down your sides. There you go. Now we're going to add 1 3/4 cup of your gluten-free flour blend. If you want, you can add a little bit of xanthan gum. It does help hold the bread together and give it a little more chewy texture. Completely optional. I just sprinkle a little bit in. It's probably about a 1/2 teaspoon to a teaspoon. You're going to want to add a good pinch of salt. I probably add about a teaspoon and a half. You're going to want to add about 2/3 of a tablespoon to a tablespoon of baking powder, not baking soda, baking powder. Guys, if you don't get this exact, it's okay. It's still going to turn out. Just rough ingredients here. Make it easy on yourself. We're going to blend that all together. Again, we're going to scrape down our sides. That's snagged on my doohickey thing. Now we're going to add a little splash of apple cider vinegar. The apple cider vinegar, the baking powder, and the yeast are all what's going to give this bread some rise. Just a splash. If you add too much apple cider vinegar, it will kill your yeast. Probably about a teaspoon. Now we're going to add our yeast. You can see that it has risen, so it's good yeast. Dump the whole thing in. Okay, so here's where you add your fats. Now, I add between 4 to 5 tablespoons of fat. You can add that in all butter, or you can substitute 1 or 2 tablespoons with lard. Totally up to you, depending on what kind of taste you like. You can even add bacon grease if you have that. Whatever kind of fats you save, it just adds a little bit of flavor. And you know what I mean, like a little bacon flavored bread. Good stuff. So I'm going to add about 3 tablespoons of butter. And about 1 tablespoon of lard. Sounds good. And blend. Okay, so you want the dough to be about the consistency of cake batter. This is a little too thick, so we're going to need to thin it down with some hot water. anything you know about cooking regular wheat bread, you're not going to do that for gluten-free bread. And that was my biggest mistake when creating this recipe and all my discoveries and learning how to cook gluten-free bread. You don't make it anything like the way you make regular wheat bread. Gluten-free bread requires a very thin consistency, at least the way I make it, it does. And that gives it, if you make it too thick, it won't rise. It becomes a very dense bread. So you want it to have a cake-like batter consistency. And then you cook it on a lower temperature than bread so that it doesn't get really rock hard on the outside. And then it only gets one rise, so you don't punch it down and let it rise a second time. You only get one rise out of a gluten-free bread. So for this particular batter, this is a little too thick. We're going to add a little bit of hot water to it. We're going to start off with about 2/3 of a cup of water. And there you go. Okay, so now we're going to put this into a cast iron pan. I've used other pans, like metal pans, before. I can say that different types of pans will give you different results. I personally like the cast iron pan. This costs about $12 or $13. I personally think it's a really good investment. What you're going to do with your cast iron is you're just going to pour a little splash of olive oil in it. Maybe about a teaspoon. And just use your hand to coat the inside. And now we're just going to dump this in. My house is a little bit too cold for this dough to rise, so what we're going to do is we're going to put it in the oven and warm up the oven just a little bit to give this time to rise. Okay, so I put my oven on the lowest setting, which is 170, and I just give it a little bit of, just a few minutes to warm up, and then I'll turn the oven off. And I'm going to put this in here. We'll just give it like a minute, and then I'm going to turn the oven off. And now we're just going to turn the oven off. And we're going to just let it sit in there for probably about 30 minutes until it starts to rise. So we'll see in about 30 minutes. Okay, it's only been maybe about 7 or 8 minutes. And you can see the bread has risen to the top of the pan. So what we're going to do is we're going to just leave that in there, and we're going to turn our oven on 350. And as soon as that gets up to temperature, I'm going to set the timer for 50 minutes. What we want is we want the internal temperature of our bread to reach about 180 degrees. Okay, we're at 350. We're just going to set our timer for 50 minutes. All right, guys, let's take it out. So it should be somewhere around 180 degrees. I have this little thermometer here. Stick in. There we go. Now you want to immediately take it out of the pan because if you don't, it's going to get all soggy. And you can see that the inside of our cast iron is wet. You want to wipe that out so it doesn't rust. So first we're going to flip this over on its side, and we're going to let it cool. I'm going to get a napkin and wipe out this cast iron. Now I don't wash this, guys. I leave this just as is, and I just continue to add the oil whenever I bake the next loaf of bread, like you see me do, or like you see me do earlier, and that's it. That gets put away as soon as that cools off. Now, this is not going to win any pretty awards, but this loaf of bread took me a little bit more than an hour to make. It was about 50 minutes to bake, about 7 minutes to rise, and I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to blend it up in the blender. And for something that's that quick, compared to say other recipes where you're measuring out 20 different ingredients on a scale, or you're using expensive blends, to me there's no comparison. I'm not worried about pretty here, I'm worried about functionality, and this is a really good tasting bread. It's really soft, and once this cools down I'll show you just how nice it is. Okay, so this has been cooling for, I don't know, maybe about an hour now, and I just flipped it back and forth like a couple times so that it didn't get too soggy on one end. It's pretty dry. We'll cut it open. You can see how soft it is. So there you go. And now when I store this, I just store this right on this cutting board, and I wrap it in this wax cloth. Now I make these, all it is you take a piece of cloth, I think I got this from Walmart, and you cover it in beeswax, and I'll show you how to do that at the end. But I just take this, put it on here, and just store it like this on my countertop. Alright, so let's talk about stale bread. This is a loaf of bread that is about 6 days old. You can see it's starting to get hard. Don't throw this out. I mean, of course you can give it to your chickens or whatever to eat, but I'm going to show you what I use this for. So, one thing you can do with this is you can make it into croutons and put it on your salad. And to do that, you're just going to want to cut it into cubes. Put a little bit of olive oil in a bowl. A little pinch of salt. A little pepper. And if you want, you can add a little bit of garlic powder or garlic salt. And we're just going to toss these in here. Spread them out on a tray. And we're going to bake these on 400 degrees for just a few minutes until they get nice and toasty. Something else you can do is you can dice up your stale bread just like I just showed you. You can spread it on a tray and bake it on 250 for about 30-40 minutes until the bread dries out completely. And then just grind it up in a food processor or a blender. And you got yourself some breadcrumbs, gluten-free breadcrumbs. These things I've seen in the store for like $6-7 for a plastic container of gluten-free breadcrumbs. And you guys have your own, and it's free. So yeah, go ahead and do that, and you can even add spices to it if you like. I just store these in a mason jar and in my cupboard. Now I'm going to show you guys a couple other really cool Depression and World War II recipes, breakfast recipes that you can also make with stale bread. That's going to come up in another recipe. But for the most part, this is it. You got yourself gluten-free bread for somewhere around $1, $1.50 a loaf of bread. Super cheap, super easy, make it in 1 hour, and yeah, I mean, it's good stuff. So I hope you guys try it. If you guys do, leave it below. I want to hear from you guys. If you guys have your own recipe that you guys want to talk about, or tips or tricks, leave that below as well. And we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Hi guys, it's Jamie from Gluten Free Farms. This is kind of a hobcobble, is that how you say it, hobcobble? Cobble hobble? Cobble hobble?
Hobnob.
Hobnob? How do you say it?
Hodgepodge?
No, cobble? Cobble?